What's up, everybody? Cody Bidlow with SprintingWorkouts.com and ATHLETE.X. Today I'm going to go over a couple workouts and talk about how we can balance strength development with athletic development by using different setups, different ranges of motion, things like that. So, obviously getting stronger is important. It's how we improve our ultimate ability to produce force, and our ability to produce force is the basis of all other athletic qualities. So as I'm doing box squats here, I'm working on, building strength, but I'm doing it in a range of motion that is relevant to athleticism. If you look at my jump squats, if you look at my box squats, my double leg bounds, all my jumping exercises, my body only wants to go to, say, a quarter squat or a half squat depth when I'm doing them. So while it's important to make sure we can access a full squat depth, I think full squats should only be done at sub-maximal percentages. And if we're really trying to drive up the loading, we can use something like a box squat to parallel, because as you can see here, when I'm doing the jump squat, I'm only going so deep, and that's not necessarily intentional. It's just I'm going with the range of motion my body wants to be in when being explosive. So then as we're doing these box squats, if we hit a range of motion that's similar, we can be driving up strength in that range of motion that we're going to actually use in sport, rather than using a range of motion that we're never going to access in sport. Still, we want to do some full squatting, but at submaximal weights, just so we have access and we can maintain, overall good strength abilities. But we don't want to overdo that at the expense of these more sport-specific or athleticism-specific ranges of motion. Another thing is, you can use a submaximal weight like this following a heavy squat. So that way, you get the stimulus of that slow grinding lift like I did with 425, but then I follow it up with a very manageable load that I can feel powerful with. And I think this is another way that we can sort of help drive athleticism while still driving strength. Balance the loads that are more power oriented with the loads that are more strength driven, balance the ranges of motion. And these are ways that we can target athleticism and strength at the same time. We can also use single leg exercises like this single leg deadlift. The leg position that you're in at the bottom is pretty relevant to sprinting, I think. Slightly open knee. You're getting a lot of lengthening on the hamstrings. And when I do this, I feel soreness that's similar to what I feel when I sprint. So I think that might be a good sign that the hamstrings are being used in a way that might be relevant to sprinting. If the soreness is similar, this is also going to light up your adductors. So if you do this, make sure you start light. Do not go heavy at first, otherwise it'll destroy you. But going back to the contrast idea, I contrast those single leg deadlifts with this single leg RDL plate press, where I'm trying to quickly reverse from the bottom into that press in the high knee position with a little bit of a jump off of the ground. This way we're getting the stretch shortening cycle into it. We're getting a higher velocity movement. We're getting a more sport-specific range of motion, and you're also challenging the body for balance and coordination. You can see there's a lot of calf involvement, Achilles involvement, hamstrings, popliteus. So I think this is a great exercise for sprinters if you want to develop strength. You don't have to use super heavy loads. I would suggest you don't use super heavy loads, but this is an exercise that I think, compared to, say, a conventional deadlift, this is going to be more relevant to sprinters. So if you're going to deadlift, consider using the single leg deadlift and consider pairing it with something like this RDL plate press. So that way you're getting both sides of the strength and athleticism spectrum within your training. After I did these, I went into some other exercises like some med ball throws against the wall, some internal and external rotation work. So with these med ball throws, I'm really trying to get the core to engage once again in that stretch shortening cycle. If you do these, you're going to feel your obliques a lot the next day, and that's a good sign in my opinion. You do both sides, it's going to challenge you, coordinatively, because you're always going to be better throwing with one arm over the other. So doing things like this in a staggered stance, I think also helps with getting some stretch through the hips, which is probably a good thing. Do different variations. So like I had the staggered stance before, here's a bilateral stance where I'm throwing more from a low angle rather than throwing it from shoulder height. So this is going to hit slightly different angles and including these different angles is probably good for athleticism. This overhead one, this is going to really work on the rectus abdominis. It's also getting some nice shoulder range of motion, elbow range of motion. So if you struggle with shoulder range of motion, this might be a good exercise for you. You're also getting the lats involved. It's just an overall good exercise. So as you do these, you want to feel the weight pulling you back. And then once you feel that maximum point of stretch where you feel like it's an optimal place to reverse the load, that's where you really want to put the effort. So we're letting elasticity and that stretch shortening cycle happen as the ball comes back. And then we use that and generate, force and power from that position and launch the ball into the wall. By getting in tune with these stretch shortening cycle actions and feeling what it's like to have tissue stretch and have that stretch of the tissue lead to the actual, output of force and that concentric movement to finish the movement, that's the type of thing that I think can help us become more athletic and become better athletes, just because that's really what drives all athletic movements is some form of stretch shortening cycle action. So then I finished with these internal and external rotation movements. Basically, I'm getting into a high knee position and rotating the femur internally and externally. We want to make sure that we have access to internal and external rotation on the front side and the back side of the body. So I do them both in this high knee kind of A position, as well as with the shin pointing backward and my knees together. You'll find that one of them is probably going to be harder than the other for you. And obviously, judging by this, it's harder for me to do it with the leg on the backside. And I think that also is probably playing a role in why I have had these hip issues. Maybe I'm lacking internal and external rotation, range of motion at a certain point in the sprint stride cycle, and that might be frying my hip flexors. So doing things like this, I notice really lights up my glute med and the hips in general. So to me, it seems like a good thing to do. If those muscles get a little bit tired, probably a sign that they're getting worked. So, these are other little things that you can do that are going to be a low energy requirement. They're not going to tire you out or, fry you or anything like that. But I think they allow us to make sure that we have access to the ranges of motion we need to be athletic. And if we're doing that in our training and pairing that with the things that are going to drive up force, drive up power, then we can really target this whole, the holistic athlete type of thing. We want to make sure that we can do the movements that are specific to sport. We want to make sure we can do general exercises, general ranges of motion, and we want to keep our body healthy. So these are things that we can do to encourage that. So on this day 2 workout here, the focus was on doing sprint drills. So we got these little A-run type of things going on. I wanted to get some high heel recovery in there because I think it's really important to make sure that we can compress the spring or compress the lever of the leg as we're sprinting. So you can see that I'm bouncing off the ground, getting a little bit of lift into the air, and then I'm trying to bring that calf as close as I can to the hamstring and then bring it back down under me to keep bouncing along the turf here. So these drills felt good. They also kind of helped warm me up for the jumps that I was going to do. But considering I haven't sprinted in over a month, I think it's really important that I continue to do these and they can kind of bridge me back into sprinting. And as I can do these with no pain, without my hip getting pissed off, I think that's also a good sign that I'm, one step closer to sprinting. So then I did skips for height. I noticed that on these, it was a little hard to manage my posture in space, kind of bouncing all over the place. So that tells me that there's some room to develop here. As I approach the ground, I'm really trying to get as much force as I can in as short of a time as possible. I'm not trying to go too far each step, just trying to bounce up into the air. And as you can see, there was a weird step there. Those are little things that can tell you, hey, I need to work on this more so that I can make sure I can maintain my balance in the air versus right here where the leg kind of kicks out. Not exactly sure what's going on there. I got to look at this in more depth, but there's things we can learn from watching movement, and the more we practice this stuff and the better we get at it, the better it's going to be for athleticism. So then I went into these double leg bounds. These felt pretty good. Haven't done them in a really long time, so they're a little sloppy, but this gets into repeat power ability It's one thing to be able to do an explosive jump, but can you keep doing it? Can you maintain your explosive outputs over multiple reps? That's where I see jumping becoming more relevant to sprinting. Yes, we want to be able to do one very explosive jump, but if we can maintain our jumps and continue to bounce off the ground, maintain elasticity, I think that's where we can get a little bit more out of our jump training as it relates to sprinting. I'm also working on getting that high heel recovery in these, and I felt like on the reps where I really did hit good heel recovery, it felt more athletic, it felt more bouncy. So, that's something to keep in mind is as you're doing jumps, play around with heel recovery, see if it feels better right when you come off the ground to pick those heels up, bring your calves to your hamstrings, and see if it feels better. When I did box jumps, my box jumps felt a lot better when I was able to get that high heel recovery, and it allowed me to get up onto the box more easily with less effort and without any hip pain. When I do the straight leg jumps, I get a little hip pain sometimes, so that tells me, hey, keep working on this heel recovery, and that's going to help you with your sprints. So these are 54 inches still. I haven't gone up to 60 just because I want to make sure that when I do try 60-inch box jumps that I really can get it. But before we wrap this up here, pay attention to the depth that I jump from. You can see it's that quarter squat depth. So that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning where, pay attention to the ranges of motion that you're jumping from, sprinting from, and make sure that your training incorporates some of that stuff, especially in the faster movements or in things like box squats. We want to make sure that we're hitting these ranges of motion so that way we're competent in them, and that when we go to sprint or jump, we're including some force-oriented work in those ranges of motion, as well as the power and velocity work that we get from the jumps and sprints and sprint drills. If we can combine all these things into a holistic training program, I think we have our best shot at being as athletic as possible. So keep in mind how you can balance all these qualities with, contrasting and supersets within a workout, contrasting workouts. Maybe you have a heavier day and a faster day. They don't have to be back to back, but within a week or within 2 weeks, you should definitely be covering multiple bases ranging from heavier, slower stuff, faster, more bouncy stuff, more power and explosive oriented work, some single leg, some double leg work, as well as including those internal external rotation stuff, rotational med ball throws. All these things are going to play a big role in allowing you to be as athletic as possible. So that's all I have for you guys today. Hope you got something out of this video, but I'll catch you guys next time. This is Cody Bidlow with SprintingWorkouts.com and ATHLETE.X signing off.